So this is a real quick mini writing lesson. I'm going to start taking student writing and workshopping it with you in a very short video because I'm seeing some of the same writing, I don't even want to call them mistakes, but writing things that we're doing that we need to change as we continue and move through your writing life into junior year. So this is a student's response on the Open Doc. And one of the things that I want to focus on in this mini lesson will be where a sentence begins and ends and how the commas work between sentences. So when I was in high school, I thought, okay, I'm going to put a comma every place I would take a breath. So if I ran out of breath when I'm reading that sentence, I'm going to stick a comma in there. And that's not the way to do it. And so it was many years later that a teacher in college taught me how to teach writing to other people. And I finally realized that there is a quick writing rule that we can follow to determine where to put a comma and where our sentences begin and end. So the first part of this lesson is, where do our sentences begin and end? And the first key to understand that is that a sentence will always have these two things. There's always going to be a subject and a verb. So the thing and the action, or the person and the action. So I walk is a sentence because I is the subject and walk is the action, the verb. So that is a complete sentence. If I say, I walk to the store, so I'm making a more complex sentence by adding to the store, right? And bought a candy bar. Okay, so that is a more complex sentence because I'm adding this linking word, this connector, and, right? Which is what you want to do. You want to add and, but, because in order to stretch your sentences and continue your thinking. But every time you do that, you need to make a decision. Do I put a comma before that and, or do I leave it and not put a comma? So here's the rule. If you notice a subject, the I, right, is the subject, on both sides of this word, this connecting word, and, then you need a comma before the connecting word, before and. So let's test it out. Do we have a subject on both sides of that word and? I walked to the store and bought a candy bar. So no. Just my eye is telling me I don't see the subject I on either side. So I don't need a comma. In that case, the and is strong enough to be alone without a comma. However, the minute that I add that subject on the other side of this word and, I will need to have a comma. So the and is not strong enough to be on its own if I have a subject on both sides of that and. So where do I put the comma? I always put the comma before the connecting word. You never need a comma after the connecting word. I see this a lot in student writing where the comma is placed after the and or the because or the or. No, the comma always goes comma and. So what is the rule? If there is a subject on both sides of the and, then you need a comma before the and. If there is only one subject, which is totally doable and makes sense as well, then you do not need the and. And this is actually bar. Okay. So what are some other connecting words to be on the lookout for? Because, for, so, nor, I think that's a or, okay? So we have these words make the same rule where you have to have the comma. So your eye really needs, your vision really needs to look for those connecting words, and then you have to test it. What's the subject to the left of that connecting word, right? Always look for the subject to the left of it, subject, and is that subject on both sides? So let's test this out with the student's writing here. Throughout the whole book, Luis made many poor choices where he could have avoided the situation, but he chose to be a follower. So I see a connecting word, but. Actually, I have to add that to our list. That is another connecting word. So let's test what we just learned. So we're going to highlight the connecting word, and in this case it is but, okay? So we're going to make sure that we see that that's important to isolate, so our vision is going to that first. So let's backtrack it. What comes before this connecting word but? Where is the subject? So the subject right here, who is the person doing the action? Luis. He did the action of making many poor choices, and then she adds this. I'm going to leave this out for a little bit. I'm going to pretend that that's not there for a minute. Okay. So throughout the whole book, Luis made many poor choices. So here's the subject. Okay, I'm going to put the subject in red. And do I see a subject on the other side of the connecting word? I do. So yeah, it's not the same word, but he does substitute for Luis. So I do see the subject on both sides. So we need to make sure that there is a comma before the connecting word, and there is. However, what if she didn't have it? Throughout the whole book, Luis made many poor choices but chose to be a follower. That's correct. So you can say that. She chose to include the subject on both sides. That is also correct. However, the minute you add that subject, you need to put the comma before that connecting word. Let's see if we see another one. He lets people around him control his everyday life and lead him down the wrong path. Okay. So I do see an and, I do see a connecting word. I notice that the subject here, he, right, is doing something. He lets people around him control his everyday life and lead him down the wrong path. So we don't need it because there's not, technically this is not, it should be which leads him, right? Okay, so so the minute that we see a which, okay, this is a very special rule here. We always want a comma before which. And that's just something to keep in your mind because you're adding additional information. It's sort of like, I'm going to tell you something and then this happened as well. So he does this, he lets people do something, and the result is this. So as a writer, you're choosing to use the word which, right, to show the result, which is excellent. Actually, this which, or I always say comma which, because you want to write a comma before the which, this is a great writing extension. So if you want to have a quick trick to extend your writing and get deeper with your thought process in your analysis, add a comma which. So it's a real simple trick. It always does the job of giving you an extra push in your analysis because the writer is telling us something more. She's making another inference around the people who control him. She's giving us a result, which leads him down the wrong path. I just want to spend a second before we leave. So we have, just to clarify, we had practice with where to put a comma when using a connecting word because we see that we need, if we have a subject on either side, we need that comma, right, before the connecting word. And our other takeaway is when you have which, right, to give a result for something or to make deeper analysis, right, you want to have a comma before that which. Our third takeaway is when do we end a sentence? Like, where do we make sentences? Okay, so again, you know, I already told you, and you know this, right, from a long time ago, that this is a sentence, a subject and verb. But it gets trickier when we begin to write with more complexity, which is what you're doing, which is exactly what you should be doing. And that's what this writer did. So let's dissect this to see what we need to do to make this 2 sentences, because when I read it, he lets the people around him control his everyday life. She could have just said that, right? And she could have put a sentence there. And that's fine. But she's doing what we're supposed to be doing, and she's adding more complexity to her sentence and extending it using this trick of comma which. But it continues after that. And the warning sign is when you have the 2 commas, you keep having these phrases where you're extending and you're connecting them with commas. 2 is really too much when we're learning how to write with complexity, which is what we're doing in 10th grade. So which leads him down the wrong path. Let's put a period here. She's made a statement about the subject, he's letting people control him, and she's extending it with a result. This is a separate idea. His whole friend group encourages him to do bad things with lots of peer pressure. That is related to this because they are the people around him, but she has another idea that the friend group encourages him and there's peer pressure. So with each new idea, right, you have to decide, do I use that new idea to extend my sentence or do I put a period there? So because this is so different than this and we already have an extension to our sentence, we're going to make a decision to end the sentence here, break it, and start a new one. His whole friend group encourages him to do bad things through lots of peer pressure. And we're going to end it there. We've already made just some minor tweaks to this student's writing, but they are so important because teachers, especially the older you get, junior, senior year into college, teachers will expect, professors will expect, your bosses in your career, in your job will expect when you write an email, submit a report, make a recommendation, write a letter. These are all things that people expect you to have in it. So we've already learned how to use our commas when you see a connecting word. We've learned a little trick for extending sentences and always having a comma before which when we put that result in with our extension. And we've learned when to make a decision about putting a period and breaking a sentence apart. We're going to do more with that in another lesson, but this is today's mini lesson, and I hope you have enjoyed it.